We're on top of the Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Actually, like 10 lines in, Be'erech. The first word on the line is Basada, Rabbe v'Rav Yosef, the Omri Tarvayu. The Gemara here is discussing the Mishnah at the bottom of the Lamed Dalet Amud Beis. If you take a look in the Mishnah there, it says, a person that places the Eid of Tchumen into a closet, and he lost the key to the closet. So there's a machlokes in the Mishnah, the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Eliezer, whether it's a good Eid or not. The Tanna Kama says it's still a good Eid, even though he can't access the food from the Eid of Tafshilin. It's okay. Rabbi Eliezer says it's not a good Eid unless he knows where the key is. So the Gemara now gives a pshat in this Mishnah. Before the Gemara explained that the Mishnah is talking about a closet that's actually made from bricks without any cement. And there's a svara that you can remove one brick and take out the key. That's why the Tanna Kama says it's a good Erev, and that's on Yontif. The Mishnah is talking about Yontif. Now the Gemara gives a second pshat. Rabbe v'Rav Yosef d'Amri Tarvayu. Rabbe and Rav Yosef both say the pshat here is Hacha b'migdal shel eitz askinan. We're talking about a wooden closet, not made out of bricks, but a regular wooden closet. Mar Savar. So now one opinion here is Kelihu. Even though it's a large closet, and it's heavy enough to carry 40 saw. Usually in the halachas of Tumas, something that's large enough to carry 40 saw is not a regular keli. It's not movable. So even though it's a large closet, nevertheless, kelihu, it still has the status of a keli. It's not considered to be a structure, a tent, a house. It's a keli. Ve'ein binyin bekelim, ve'ein stira bekelim. There's no isser of building in a keli, and there's no isser of demolishing in a keli. Just like in the Mishkan, the binyan and the stira was regarding the building of the structure of the Mishkan itself, not in kelim. So over here, when you get takeli, aim binyan bekelim, vein stira bekelim. There's a machlekes Rishonim about this concept. What aim binyan bekelim, vein stira bekelim means. Rashi in many places holds it means literally. There's no malacha of binyan regarding a keli in any way. Taisvis in many places says it depends if it's a binyan gomor or if it's not a binyan gomer. If you're mamish building a keli, there's this act that you're doing in a keli that's a binyan gomer, then there is a binyan. But over here, in this case, what does the person have to do? Break open the lock, break open this closet to get the food, so then there's no issue. It's not considered to be a stira gomer, and therefore you can get your food even on Shabbos. Mar Savar, Oyelhu. But the Tanna Kama says that this is considered to be a tent. It's like an oil. It's large enough that it's not a keli anymore. It's considered to be like an oil, and therefore you can't break it open. There's a isser of binyan, and there's isser of stira of demolishing it if you would break it open on Shabbos. This argument here regarding the status of this closet is similar to a machlokes Tanoim that we find regarding Tumah. The Tanan, or actually it's a Braise. The Tanya we learned in a Braise regarding a Zav. So a Zav that moves something, he makes it tummy. Even if you're wearing gloves, let's say, and the Zav did not touch it, but he just moved it, he makes it tummy. So the Braisa says, Hikish al gabe shida teva migdal. If a Zav it moves, he pushes, he bangs and pushes a shida teva migdal, which is a carriage, a box, or a closet, and they're large. Tmein, it becomes tummy. Rab Nechemia, Rab Shimon, Metarim. Rab Nechemia, Rab Shimon says, even though the Zav moved it, it's still toy. So my lav baka miflagi. It seems like that the point of their argument is Mar Savar Kelihu. The Tanna Kama says that if you move something which is a keli, so that's susceptible to tumah. Mar Savar Oyelu. Rab Nechemia and Rab Shimon say it's not a keli. It's like a permanent structure, or like a tent, which is a place to live in, not a stama keli. So therefore, even if the Zav moves it, it's still going to be tired. So we see a source for this machlekes when you have a large closet, a large box, and you move it, whether it has a status of a keli or an oil. Amar Abaye. So Abaye says, no, this is not a good source. V'tizbura, is this a good svara, or could you make this comparison? Tanya, we learned regarding the tumah of a Zav, regarding the oil. Oil, if you actually have a tent, so it's not a keli, it's a tent. V'nisit, and it was moved through the Zav. Tummy, it's going to be tummy. Keli, if you have just a vessel and the Zav touches it, or he touches it, but he's wearing gloves and he didn't move it. Ve'ein nisit, it did not move out of its place. Toir, it's going to be toir. So what do you see over here? When it comes to the tumah of the zav, it doesn't matter if it has a status of a keli or it has a status of an oil. Either way, if you move it, it's tameh. If you did not move it, it's tahir. So we can't bring any source from this machlokes that we said before between the Tanna Kama and Rab Nechemia and Rab Shimon regarding the status of a closet, a box, if it's like an oil or a keli, it doesn't matter. Another thing the Gemara says, another question, Okatani Seifa, we learned in the Seifa of the Braisa that we quoted before, the machlokes, that im hayu nisutin, if you have a shida, teva, and migdal, and when the zav moved it, it actually moved out of its place, tmeim, it's going to be tamei. Zeh klal, and the Braisa says there as follows, this is the rule, nisut machmas koichai, tamei. If there's something that moved because of the koyach directly of the zav, that he touched it and he moved it, then it's going to be tamei. Machmas ra'ada tahir. But if it was only machmas ra'ada, which means that you shook it, not directly, Rashi says, there's a few pshatim with this. Rashi's pshat is that he stamped with his feet on the ground right near this tent, and because of that, the tent moved. Not that you moved it directly, but you stamped on the ground. You shook the ground around it, and it moved it out of its place. Then it's tahir, because that's indirect. So what do we see over here? It doesn't depend if it has the status of a keli or an oil. That doesn't make a difference. If you move it out of its place directly, it'll be tamei. If you move it indirectly, you just shake the ground, then it's tahir. Elamar Abaye, so Abaye says, the kula alme heset machmas koichay tamei. So if you would move it directly, so then it would be tamei. Machmas ra'ada tahir. If you move it indirectly, you shake the ground around it, and that moves the tent, it's going to be tahir. The hacha, the machlokes that we quoted before regarding a shida, teva, and migdal, if you move it, if it would be tamei or not, b'ra'ada machmas koichay askinon. Over here, the person shook the tent, or he shook the box, but he didn't move it out of its place. So in other words, there's three different scenarios of possibilities here. You have a case where a person moves the box out of its place. You have a case where a person just shook the earth around it, and that shook this box. And then you have a case where you're shaking the box itself, but you didn't move it out of its place. That's where the argument is, in that last case. And here, that's the argument here in the Braisa that we quoted before. Mar Sava have a heset. I shook it. It was a ra'ada. It shook, but it didn't move out of its place. It's considered to be heset. That's enough of a movement that the zav moved it to make it tamei. Umar Sava lo have a heset. And the opinion of the Rab Nechemia and Rab Shimon that we quoted before was that no, that's it only shook, but it didn't move out of its place, and therefore it's tahir. So this whole thing that we brought up over here about tumah and tara has nothing to do with our Mishnah that's discussing a closet that's locked and you have to demolish it, you have to break it open in order to get into the food. And over here the question is, according to Rabban Rav Yosef, the question is if it has a status of a keli or if it has a status of an oil. That has nothing to do with the inyan of zav. By zav it doesn't make a difference. So if we don't have a source from tumah and tara to this concept, so how would we explain our Mishnah? So now the Gemara brings another pshat in the machlokes in our Mishnah when the food is locked inside and you don't have the key. Abaye so Abaye and Rava both say bin minal v'koter b'misna askinan. This is a lock that's tied closed with a cord that you can open it up. As long as you can cut the cord, you can open up this lock. That's the kind of a lock that we're talking about over here. So he lost the key. If he would have the key, he would be able to open up the cord. But he doesn't have the key. So now what is he going to have to do? He's going to need a knife to cut open this lock. Tanakama Savar Law Rabbi Yosi. So the Tanakama holds like Rabbi Yosi that even if you don't have the key, you can access your food. The Amar Rabbi Yosi says, Kol HaKelim Nitolim B'Shabbos. You're allowed to move any Kelim on Shabbos. This is going back to Hilchas Muktzah. So Rabbi Yosi's opinion is you could move any Kelim on Shabbos, whether it's a Kelish Malachte Laheter, that's designated for permitted use, or even Kelim that is, that could be used only for forbidden use. Malachte le'isser. So let's say a knife that's not made for food, or a knife that's malachte le'isser, you're still allowed to move it. Chutz mimasar hagodl v'yesel shom achreisha. The only case which is muktzeh is a masar hagodl and yesel shom achreisha, which are a big saw or a part of the plow that's used in the field, which are very, very expensive machinery or expensive utensils, which is muktzeh, machmas, chesar, and kis. A person is makbid not to use them for anything else. But anything other than that, you're allowed to use a knife to cut open this lock. So you can use this knife to cut open this lock. But Rabbi Eliezer that says that you can't access your food is because he holds like Rabbi Nechemya. Rabbi Nechemya has a very stringent approach to muktzeh. The Omar afilat talis, even a garment, which is a malachta laheta, which is something you can use on Shabbos. Afilat tarvet, even a spoon. Any talin el l'tzarich tashmishan. You're only allowed to move them on Shabbos for their designated purpose. A food, to eat food from it, a garment to wear. If you're moving anything on Shabbos not for its designated purpose, it's muktzeh. You're not allowed. So a knife, which is not made for cutting open a cord of a lock, you're not allowed to use it on Shabbos for that purpose. And that's why you can't open this lock to get your food out. Zok the Mishnah, Nizgalgol chutz l'tchum. You put down your Eirov at the end of the tchum. Right? So you have your house, and 2,000 amos away is where you put down the food of your Eirov to be able to walk another 2,000 amos from that place. So now the food fell out from that area where you put it, and it rolled out outside of the tchum. Or nafal olav gal, you put down the Eirov and a pile of rocks fell down on it. Or nisraf, or it got burnt, the food got burnt. Truma v'nitmis, or if it was truma, it became tummy, and now nobody could eat it. If any of this happened before Shabbos, ein Eirov, so it's not a good Eirov. So when Shabbos came in, there was no food there that was fit for use. If it happened after it became dark already, then it's a good Eirov. As long as the food is there by Bein Hashmashis, you establish your dwelling there at that time, so that's good. You can carry from there, you can walk from there, that is another 2,000 amos. Im Safik, how about if you don't know when this happened? You placed it down there and you come there later on Shabbos and you see that the food is not there, or it was burnt, or that it rolled out, and you don't know exactly when it happened. Did it happen by day or did it happen by night? Rav Yehuda says, Harei zeh chamor gamol. The Mishnah here is giving an example. Chamor gamol means like a person that has a donkey that's in front of him that he's riding on or he's walking with, and he has a camel that's behind him. So if the person has a donkey in front and a camel behind, he's between them. He always has to pay attention to what's in front of him and what's behind him. So the same thing over here. If you have an Eirov that you place down, and you're not sure if that's a good Eirov, so now you're going to be locked. You could only walk between your house and this Eirov. You can't walk 2,000 amos on the other side of your house, away from where you place down this Eirov, because could be that's where your dwelling is. And you can't walk 2,000 amos from the Eirov in the other direction, because could be your dwelling is in your house. Where's the person's dwelling? We don't know. Is his dwelling on Shabbos established in his house or by the Eirov? So therefore the only space you can walk is in between your house and the Eirov, but not beyond the house in one direction or beyond the Eirov in the other direction. That's the mashal of Chamar Gamol. There's a suffix, so we have to be machmer. Rabbi Yossi v'Rab Shimon oimrim. Rabbi Yossi and Rab Shimon say, suffix Eirov kosher. Regarding a suffix of an Eirov, we could be lenient and rely on it that it's a good Eirov. Rabbi Yossi, av tulmus Heyid Mishum Chamisha Zekenim. Av Tulmus said over, testified in the name of 5 Zekenim, al Safik Eirov Shekosher, that a Safik Eirov will be kosher. The Gemara will explain this machlokes. Sagt the Gemara, Nizgalgol Chutz L'Tchum. So we learned in the Mishnah an Eirov that rolled out of the place where you put it at the end of the Tchum, and it rolled out outside of the Tchum, that it's not a good Eirov. Omar Rave says, Rave, Leishanu Elishin is Galgal Chutz L'Arba Ames. That's only if it rolled out of the 4 Ames of where the Eirov was placed. Avol L'Toich Dal Dames. The Eirov rolled out of its place, but it's still within 4 Ames of where you put it, and within the Tchum of the Tchum, then it's okay, because Hanaisin Eiruvai Yashle Dal Dames. Wherever you place down your Eirov, around that area you have 4 Ames, which is as if it's surrounded with a mechitza, like a Reshus HaYachid, and even if it rolls out of the place where you put it, as long as it's within 4 Ames of the Tchum, it's still like it's in its original place and you're allowed to access it. Okay, we had this before already, the Gemara already mentioned this before. This is the source of this concept. Sagt the Gemara, Nafal Olav Gal V'chulu. So it said in the Mishnah that if a pile of rocks fell onto the Eirov, so then you can't access the Eirov. So if it fell down during the day, it's not a good Eirov. Kosol Kedaitoch. So the Gemara thinks, what's the reason? The Ibai Matzi Shakale. If this person wants, l'chayre, if this person wants, he can still go and take it. Why could he go and take it? What's the problem? What's the issue of moving the rocks? Moving the rocks, the only issue would be muktzah, as Rashi here says, tiltul. The tiltul avanim is just muktzah, so it's asam with the rabbanon. So the problem is that he can't move the rocks because it's muktzah. So it's not a good eruv. So if so, the Mishnah is not following the opinion of Rebbe. The Rebbe ha'amar, as we learned before a few times, Rebbe says, Kol davashum mishum shvos, anything that's only forbidden with the rabbanon, lo ygazru alav bein hashmashis. So bein hashmashis, there's no issue. The eruv has to be accessible bein hashmashis, that you can do something minatayra. Even if with the rabbanon you can't, it doesn't matter. So over here we're saying, just because of muktzah, it's not a good eruv. Answers the Gemara, afilu teim v'kerebi. No, the Mishnah can follow Rebbe's opinion as well. Like tzriche, the boy mara v'chatzina. We're talking over here about an eruv that's on the rocks, and you need a shovel or a spade. You need a tool, a utensil to dig and to uncover this eruv, and that's chayrish. It's a malachim in atayra. And now the Gemara explains that utzrichi. We need the two cases in the Mishnah. What were the two cases we had? The eruv rolled out of its place, or the eruv got covered by rocks. In both cases, it's the same point. You can't access the food. Why does the Mishnah say both cases? Itaran is galgol. If it would say the case where it rolled out of its place, mishum delesa gabe, the eruv is not anymore by you. It can't be accessed in the place where you put it. That's why it's not good. Avol nafal of gal, if a pile of rocks fell on it, niise gabe. It's there in the place that you put it. It's covered, but it's in the place that you put it within the 2,000 amas, within your tchum. Maybe the fact that it's covered is not a problem. I would think it might be an eruv. Of gal. On the other hand, if it would only say the case where a pile of rocks fell in it, I would say mishum de machasi. It's covered. You can't access it. It's totally covered. Avol nisgalgol. But if it rolled out of the place where it was, zimnin dasi zika maisila. Just like it rolled out, a wind could come and blow it back in. So maybe it's still considered to be the food is there available for you. It could come back in. Tzricha, therefore the Mishnah says both cases, that if it's not in the place where you put it, and it went out or it got covered, it's not a good eruv. The next case in the Mishnah was oy nisref, or the eruv got burnt, or trumeh v'nitmis, or it's trumeh that became tomei. Lamali, why is the Mishnah saying these two cases? And says the Gemara, tana nisraf, the Mishnah says the case of an eruv that got burnt, lo diyacha koicha de Rabbi Yosi, to tell you to what extent Rabbi Yosi is mekel. Rabbi Yosi is the one that says in the Mishnah that if you have a suffix, you could rely on the fact that the eruv was there by bein hashmashis. In other words, what's Rabbi Yosi relying on? As we'll see soon in the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi is relying on a chazakah. The chazakah is that if I placed the eruv there, that it was probably there bein hashmashis. So I rely on the chazakah even in a case where the food is burnt. It's non-existent anymore. I still say that at bein hashmashis it was there. And Tana Truma v'nitmes, on the other hand, the Mishnah says the case of Truma that got Tomei, l'diyacha koicha de Rab Meir, to tell you to what extent Rab Meir was machmer, that even though the food is here, and l'chayre there's a chazakah that I should apply to this food, that it was probably tohoyer at the time of Ben Hashmashis, nevertheless Rab Meir does not rely on that chazakah. So now the Gemara will discuss this machlokes of a suffix eruv, whether you could rely on a suffix eruv or not, could you rely on a chazakah or not. Sagt the Gemara, v'savar Rab Meir sveike l'chumra. Does Rab Meir hold that if you have a suffix about something, you have to be machmer and you can't rely on a chazakah? Tanan, what we learned in the Mishnah, this is a very classical case that's brought in many places regarding the concept of suffix. Anytime you have a suffix, what's the usual halacha regarding a suffix? You go according to a chazakah. Which chazakah are we talking about? Chazakah de meikara, the previous status that it had until when the doubt came up, and you follow that status. And this is the halacha that it says by a mikveh. Tamei sheyarad litva. A person's tamei, he went to the mikveh. Suffix toval, suffix loy toval. But now a suffix comes up. He's not sure if when he went into the mikveh, maybe there was hair sticking out, maybe his entire body was not fully immersed in the mikveh. Or another case, va'afil toval, a person went to the mikveh and he was tovel fully. Suffix toval bar boim saw, suffix loy toval bar boim saw. The mikveh originally had 40 saw, but then they measure it later after he comes out of the mikveh, and now they see that it doesn't have 40 saw. And you're not sure if at the time that he tovel did the mikveh have the minimum amount of 40 saw to be a kosher mikveh. Or a third scenario. V'chein shnei mikvos. There were two mikvos. Ba'achas yesh bar ba'im sa. One mikveh has the measurement of 40 sa. Ba'achas ein bar ba'im sa. And the other one doesn't. V'toval ba'achas man. And he used one of these mikvahs. V'en yedei beis men toval. He can't remember which one he used. Sveikoi tome. So because there's a suffix, so therefore the person is going to be tome. So we do not follow the status of a mikveh that it was tahir before. Because it's a suffix, he's going to be tame. That's the first part of this Mishnah. But now the Mishnah continues and says, when do we say that we have to be machmer and we can't rely on a chazakit that the person would be tahir? That's if it's a tumah chamura. Tumah chamura means it's a tumah minat Torah, as Rashi says. But if you have a tumah which is a lighter tumah midarabanan, and the Mishnah gives examples for a tumah midarabanan, kagan she'achal oichlin tmein, v'shasa mashkin tmein. A person eats food that's tamei or drinks food that's tamei. If you eat a chatzi pras of food or drink that's tamei, you become tamei midarabanan. V'haba roishe v'rubay b'mayim shuvin. If most of a person's body was in mayim shuvim, ma'ishenaflo al roishe v'al rubay shloisha lugim mayim shuvim, or 3 lugim of water, drawn water, falls upon you, there's a gzeir of chazal that you become tamei. And now you want to be metar yourself of a tumah midarabanan. The yorad litva, you went down to the mikveh. Suffix, now the same case like we had before. Suffix toval, suffix loit toval. There's a suffix whether you were fully immersed in the mikveh or not. Vafil toval, another case, even if you did go to the mikveh, but suffix toval bar boim sa, suffix loit toval bar boim sa. There's a suffix about the mikveh itself, whether it had the minimum requirement of 40 sa. Or the third case, v'chein shnei mikvos, ba'achas yesh bar boim sa, ba'achas ein bar boim sa, 2 mikvahs, one has the measurement of 40 sa, one doesn't, v'tava ba'achas men, v'eni dei beis men tava. And you don't know which one you went to the mikveh. So over here, sveikai toir, because it's only a tumah midarabanan, so here, in the case of a suffix, you're going to be toir. That's the Tanakama in this Mishnah. Who's the Tanakama of this Mishnah? So Rashi says, Stam Mishnah Rab Meir. So this is Rab Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yosi mitame. So Rabbi Yosi says, no, even in a case where the whole suffix is a suffix midirabanan, this whole tum is midirabanan, still we're going to be machmer for a suffix and you're going to be tame. So what do we see over here? Rabbi Meir says, in a case where it's a suffix midirabanan, you're lenient. You rely on a chazak and his tar. And regarding the Eiruvin, Rabbi Meir says you have to be machmer. Answers the Gemara, Kasava Rab Meir, Tchum and Doiraisa. Rab Meir's opinion is like Rabbi Akiva, that we had a few times, that the Isser of Tchum is Minat Torah, and therefore, Minigeh to Tchum, you have to be Machmer. By the mikveh, you only make if it's Midrabanan. Frag the Gemara, is this true? V'sava Rab Meir, Tchum and Doiraisa. Does Rab Meir hold that the Isser of walking out of the Tchum and Shabbos is Minat Torah? Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, this is later here in Masechta, we're going to learn this in Mitzvah Shem. Im ein yachalav liyoi. So what happens is, you have to measure the Tchum Shabbos. How do you measure Tchum Shabbos? You have to take a rope and you measure. So the halacha is that the rope that you use to measure could only be 50 amas long. So you measure a rope with 50 amas, but let's say when you're measuring, you come to a place where there's a ditch, and then it comes back up. So how do you measure? Do you have to measure going down? You have to measure the whole entire length of the space that you go down and then come up. All of that space is part of the Tchum Shabbos that you have to measure. Or do you stretch out the rope on one side and on the other side and you just measure it straight without going down and up? Let's take a look at the picture. If you wanted to see the picture, I believe they have a picture here. Where are we over here? On Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. So you take a look. No, they don't have a picture for this, but they have a picture for the next point that we're going to learn over here. So in other words, the point is that the area that you're measuring is not flat. There's an area you come to that goes down and then comes back up. So there's a ditch. So how do you measure there? So the Mishnah here says, Im ein yachalav liyoi bezu, im ein yachalav liyoi, if the area between the top before before it goes down, and the top that comes back up on the other side. So again, you have a valley sort of, and you have a mountain on both sides. So if the mountain on both sides and the valley in between is not under 50 amas, it's not 50 amas and less, so then you can't measure it straight without going down and coming back up. Bezu Omer Rab Distoi Bar Yanai Mishmei Rab Meir. Here Rab Distoi said in the name of Rab Meir, Shamaiti, the way you have to do this is shemekadrin baharin. You have to pierce through the mountain. The way to measure this is by piercing through the mountain. What does this mean? Piercing through the mountain. So we're going to learn about this in Mitzvah Shem later, but the point of it here is, if you take a look in picture Reish Lamed Ches, so when you're measuring space and you have a mountain that goes up, and then it comes back down. If you're going to measure the mountain just by taking a rope and putting it down on the floor, so you're going to end up measuring the entire space going up and then the entire space coming down, and you're not measuring straight. You're going to have a much bigger space that you measured. So you want to measure it without including the incline and then coming down. How do you do this? How do you measure it? So as you see here in the picture, one person, so the Braisa, the Mishnah uses the expression that you want to pierce through the mountain to measure in a way that you don't include the incline. So what do? One person stands and holds a rope by his heart, and the other person has it by his feet. And this is the way you measure. If you measure this way, you gain that space. You're not ever measuring with it, you're not including the incline in your measurement. The rope that you're measuring is always going space, and this is the way you measure 4 amos at a time. So you gain that space from the height of the person, from his heart to his feet. That's the space that you gain when you measure. You're measuring straight. You're not measuring going in an incline. That's what you do over here. So what's the point that he's saying? That when you have a ditch and there's the two sides of the ditch, if there's a space more than 50 amos in between, you have to measure this way. You're going to have to measure mekadrin baharin by piercing through, which is doing this process of measurement. Now, what's the Gemara's question? If you're going to say that the Isser of Tchumen is minat Torah, mi mekadrin. Regarding any measurement for something that is minat Torah, we don't use this kind of measurement. For space that you measure for something that's an issa minat Torah or something that's required minat Torah, you can't measure in this method. You have to measure directly the actual space of the ground, regardless if it's an incline or if it goes down. You have to measure the full space. And the Gemara here brings the source of this. By a ir miklot, which is of course a place for a person that kills b'shegig, that goes into a ir miklot, it's not only the city itself that he can go into, the tchum around the city is also part of the ir miklot. But how do you measure the ir miklot? If there's a hill there, you can't measure this way where you're piercing through, where you measure like we just described. You have to measure whatever space the ground has. And the same thing also, v'loi be'egla arufa. By an egla arufa, where you're measuring a person that died, and you have to measure how close he is to a city. So you can't measure in this method. You have to measure directly, no matter if it goes up, it goes down. You have to measure the full space without piercing through. Because over here, the measurement, there's a measurement that's required minat Torah. No, so what's the Gemara's question? Here I see that Rab Meir says that you could use this measurement by aid of tchumen, of piercing through. It must be that Rab Meir holds that tchumen is not minat Torah. So how can we say that Rab Meir holds that it's minat Torah? And says the Gemara like Kashya, ha didei, ha de Rabbe. Was one thing that Rab Meir this is his own opinion. Rab Meir himself holds that tchumen is minat Torah, and then Rab Meir is repeating in the name of his teacher the kula to measure by eidov, not like the way you measure, huh? Shamaiti, exactly. The Gemara will say now. So he was repeating something in the name of his teacher. Dekanami, Diktani, Bezu, Omer Abdestoy, Baryane, Mishum Rab Meir. And what did Rab Meir say? Shamaiti, Shemekadrin Baharim. Rab Meir heard this from his teacher, that you can measure with this method of piercing through the mountain, and that's a kula used only midrabanan. Shmami no. So therefore, it's two different opinions. It's Rab Meir, and there's what he heard from his teacher. So right now the Gemara's conclusion is that Rab Meir holds that tchumen is midairaisa. V'rami dairaisa. But now, if that's the case, the Gemara is going to ask a question from two cases where you have a suffix minat Torah. So what did it say in our Mishnah? That you can't rely on a chazaka regarding a suffix minat Torah, and therefore you can't rely on the eruv. And by the mikveh, you can't rely on the tefillah of the mikveh because it's a suffix minat Torah. Now the Gemara says there's another case that we learned in the Mishnah. Noga be'echad balayla. You touch somebody during the night, and now in the morning you wake up, you see he's not alive. Veni yedeya em chayim meis. You don't know if when you touched him whether he was alive or not. Ulomachar in the morning hishkim umatzi meis. You find that he's not alive anymore. So now the question is, are you tummy? Did you touch him when he was alive or not? Rab Meir Metair. Rab Meir says, you're tired. You could rely on a chazakah. You went to sleep the night before, he was still alive. You could rely on a chazakah that he was alive. The chachamim metamin, and the chachamim say that it's tameh. You can't rely on a chazakah. Shakol atmeis kishas mitziyasan. That anything that's tameh, if right now you discover that this person was tameh when you woke up in the morning, you have to be chayshish that when you touched him, he was tameh. So right here, what do we see? That you don't rely on a chazakah. When you went to sleep the night before, you saw this person was alive. And you don't rely on that chazakah. So why beneged, even though over here we're talking about what are we talking about over here? Again, let me repeat that again. The Chachamim hold you don't rely on the chazakah. The opposite, Rab Meir holds you do rely on the chazakah. Even though we're talking about the halacha of tumah that's min ha-Torah. And in our Mishnah, beneged to Eirut Chumin, beneged to mikveh, we don't rely on a chazakah because it's min ha-Torah, and therefore we're machmer. So what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, Amar Rab Yirmiyeh, Mishnah Seinu, in our Mishnah, when it says by the aid of Tchumen that you don't rely on the chazakah, you know what the reason is? It's speaking about a case, Kishahaya all of sheretz kol ben hashmashis. There was a sheretz that was on the food, all ben hashmashis, so it's tameh. So we know for sure it's tameh. Frek the Gemara, that's the case of the Mishnah, that the aid of Tchumen is that there was a sheretz on it, it's tameh. Ihachi bahal leimer Rabbi Yosi suffik aid of kasher. Over here, this is a case that Rabbi Yosi would say that it's a suffik, and a suffix is kosher. I mean, the Gemara is really asking if that can't be the case of the Mishnah. Then it's not a suffix. You then zavada. You know for a fact that it's tameh. So therefore, now the Gemara says no. The suffix in our Mishnah is as follows, right? How did we learn till now? How did we understand the concept of the suffix in our Mishnah? You put the food of the Eirut Chumin there, and then you come later at night or the next morning Shabbos, and you find that the Erev is not there. It rolled out or it got covered, whatever it is, and you don't know when it happened. You have no testimony, no one saw, you don't know what happened. But now the Gemara says that's not the case. The suffix is a much bigger suffix. Rabbi, Rav Yosef, the Amri Tarvayu, Hacha b'shtei kite eidem askinan. Here the case is that the suffix is not based on stam a lack of knowledge, but the suffix is based on the fact that you have two people and come and tell you that they saw that it became tamei achas emeres. One group of eidem says mebayt yom nitma, that it became tamei during the day. V'achas emeres mishachashecha. And the other one says that it became tamei at night. Right? So in such a case, Rab Meir is going to be machmer. In such a case, Rab Meir is going to say that because you have two Eidim, it's not just Tama Safik, which is a lack of knowledge. When you have a Safik where two Eidim are saying that it was Tamei during the day, and two Eidim are saying that it's Tamei during the night, over here you have to be machmer. When you have a case of a Safik where it's just a lack of knowledge, you don't know. In such a case, you rely on the previous status, you rely on the chazakah that it had till now. That's one teretz. And another teretz the Gemara says, Rav Amar Hasan Trei Chazaki L'Kula. Over here, by the case of the tefillah and the mikveh, or sorry, not the case of the tefillah and the mikveh. We're talking about the case of a person that touched somebody in the middle of the night, and he doesn't know if he touched someone that's tired or tamei. There's actually two chazakas to rely on to be mekel. What are the two chazakas to rely on? So if you look in the second Rashi explains, the first chazaka is you yourself have a status of being tahir. You have your own chazaka. Your body was tahir until this point. And also, the person that you touched had a status of being alive until this point. You discovered him to be not alive in the morning, but he was tired until this point. So you have two chazakas to rely on. So over here, Rav Meir says you could be mekel. But in the case of our Mishnah, the case by the mikveh, you're talking about a case where there's only one chazaka to rely on. Here Rav Meir says you have to be machmer if it's a chazaka regarding a safek min ha-Torah. Here even Rav Meir is going to say you have to be machmer. That's the difference. Okay.